Good evening. My name is Dick Drobnik, and I'm the chairman of the Asia Society Southern California Center and the director of the IBER MBA program at the USC Marshall School of Business. I'd like to welcome you to this virtual forum, this virtual webinar titled Navigating the Economy, in a Time of Troubles, the U.S. and China and COVID-19. This is the second event in the Asia Society Southern California's new initiative on U.S.-Asia real estate. And this initiative is being developed by the USC Lusk Center for Real Estate and the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, the two premier teaching and research centers in Southern California about real estate. This evening or this morning, depending on where you're coming from, we have 840 registrants for this event from 19 different economies, ranging from Canada to Vietnam, with about 700 residing in the United States, 40 residing in China, 40 residing in Hong Kong, about 5 apiece in Japan, Korea, India, and we even have one from Chad, as well as one from Finland and the UK. So without further ado, I'd like to mention with great respect and great thanks that OUE, a Singapore headquartered real estate development firm, is the founding sponsor of this U.S.-Asia real estate investment program. And the chairman of that firm, Stephen Riotti, is a trustee of the Asia Society, as well as a USC Marshall grad. And the East West Bank in Los Angeles is the sponsor of tonight's event. And we have 3 incredible real estate industry experts with us tonight. We have Ronnie Chan, the chairman of the Hong Leong Group, and we have Adriel Chan, the executive director of Hong Leong Properties, and my colleague, Professor Richard Green, who's the director of the USC Lusk Center for Real Estate. Richard, please take it over.
Thank you, Dick. And a very pleasant good evening or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us this evening for this conversation on China, COVID, China-US relations, making money in real estate, etc. in 2020. And of course, we have with us Ronnie Chan. And did Ronnie just disappear? Oh, there you went. Thank you. You moved on my screen, Ronnie. It occurs to me that Ronnie is one of my bosses, so I guess I have to be careful because he's a trustee in the USC Board of Trustees, which means he's the president's boss, and the president is my boss. So I guess I'll have to be more respectful than I was planning on being.
Please do.
Ronnie is very well known. I was talking with the new dean of the Marshall School of Business, Jeff Garrett, or emailing him the other day, and he said, Ronnie knows everybody, and from what I can tell, that's absolutely true. It's been running Hong Leong since the early 1990s, was a pioneer in terms of investing in China. The company started in Hong Kong very early on, made some very large bets that paid off quite handsomely, and has been a very thoughtful commentator on China in general and real estate in China in particular ever since. Also joining us is Adriel Chan, the executive director of Hong Leong Properties. One of the things that Ronnie and Adriel have in common is they are alums of USC. And Adriel is going to be weighing in on retail issues facing China, but also more broadly, sort of what are the implications of the last year or so with respect to the future of retail going forward. And so thank you, gentlemen, both for being with us this evening. I'd like to begin with the topic that's on everybody's mind, COVID. And one of the things that's striking is when you look at the number of new COVID cases, reported COVID cases in China this morning, and there are people who are skeptical about COVID reporting in general. The number for China was 11, and in the US, we're in the 60,000 to 70,000 range. And so if you could speak, Ronnie, to the evolution of COVID in China, its peak, what the policy interventions were that brought the caseload down, and how it affected business while it was rampaging, and what we'll call medium-term effects are now that it is not as widespread, but still not under control in the sense that there's still not a vaccine to keep it from potentially restarting again.
Well, first of all, Richard, thank you for the invitation to speak. As far as COVID is concerned, put it this way, the world is entering a phase of deglobalization. After World War II, basically we have been on one path of globalization, and then the breakdown of former Soviet Union that further drive globalization. And then now we are all witnessing the reversal of that. Well, why do I say that? Well, because COVID actually forces you to, in some way, to be globalized. Everybody is suffering from the same thing. It's the same bug, various strains of it. And so all of us have no choice but to face the same common enemy. And you talk about the way the Chinese and the Americans deal with it. I don't think that mankind has, where somebody is so smart, short of a vaccine, that and who knows where the vaccine will come from. I'm not that optimistic. I'm not a scientist in that regard. But consider the fact that SARS still doesn't have a vaccine, and when will we have one? I don't know. So until we do, we all have to live with the same thing. And how you deal with it, public health professionals around the world already have some common understanding on how to deal with it. The problem is the cultural overlay that differs from country to country. For example, in America, nowadays, people say that I have the right not to wear the mask. But everybody knows in the public health field that if you don't wear a mask, the chance of your catching it is much higher, and your chance of giving it to somebody else is much higher. So yes, you have a right not to wear it, but what about your responsibility of not spreading the thing? And so, it becomes, the science of it is globalized, is universal, but the cultural dimension of it is very, very troublesome. In China, it is unimaginable that someone would say that he has a right not to wear a mask. What about your responsibility? Nobody talks about it, or if you talk about it in some countries around the world, people don't listen. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is the cultural overlay then leads to a structural overlay. That is, in a country like mainland China, they can do a lot of things. That's true. That cannot be easily done elsewhere, unless the COVID becomes so serious that you have no choice but to listen to the public health scientists and do the right things, such as lockdown, such as everybody wearing a mask, and such as isolation of certain people. And it's not that we want to do that, but the bug is out there. And like it or not, it is really these cultural overlay that leads to the structural overlay that cause one country to deal with it better than others. And I assume that if the situation gets bad enough, the United States have no choice but to do what the Chinese do. What else can you do? I'm happy to see a week ago that Donald Trump and his actually it was the military leaders all wearing masks, right? The guy who says no need to wear masks is not wearing a mask. I mean, it's common sense. Doesn't he know it? Well, maybe he doesn't, but everybody around him should know. Come on, right? So I mean that is really what is facing us today.
Yeah, he did say today that wearing a mask is a patriotic act, so maybe we'll see.
Good. But then he also might have said that 3 months ago that not wearing one is patriotic. So which one?
Yeah. You hit on something about, so let's come back to your comment about globalization. And one of the things that this has shown the world to be is vulnerable to supply chain interruptions. And So here in the U.S., there was an economist at Deutsche Bank named Torsten Slog who had a really interesting graphic. He pointed out that in the U.S., something like 20% of all manufacturing, domestic manufacturing in the U.S. has a Chinese part in it. And that doesn't mean it's 60% Chinese. It means that 60% has at least one part. So if the supply chain gets interrupted, even though it's just one part, that means 20% of U.S. manufacturing is vulnerable. And as a result of this, people are talking about onshoring and understanding that this will lead to less efficient manufacturing processes, but also reduce vulnerability. Do you see that kind of thing happening, where the way we interact with each other as we make stuff is going to be interrupted as a result of all this and lead to a less globalized and less efficient, but maybe more secure, at least in terms of how people feel, world?
Well, first of all, your figure is interesting. 60% of them have at least one part from China. I think the reverse is also true, meaning that in China, that many things, especially the high-tech components, high-tech products, it will be difficult not to have an American chip, for example. And so if you think that America is vulnerable, China is perhaps more vulnerable, because the part that is made in the United States for mainland Chinese manufacturers are more critical in the whole working of the product. So it is really mutual. It is really what you're describing is just the globalization. But that said, for us to see a reversal of globalization for whatever reason, I think it's a very reasonable thing, because human history for the last 2,000-3,000 years have been just undulated in globalization, deglobalization, globalization, deglobalization. What happened to the Silk Road 2,000 years ago, right? Today, the Silk Road is probably the most unglobalized part of the world. That is west of China and east of Europe. And that's what the One Belt, One Road is all about, is to help bring the part of the world that is the least globalized today into the globalized world. Unfortunately, politics trumps everything. And so-called national security can put on a cloak of whatever, or rather, globalization can take on a cloak of national security. National security is always an issue. It never for a single second has it ever not been an issue to any country, especially to major countries such as the United States and China. It's just a matter of how you deal with it. So back to your supply chain thing, I can see the argument why it is necessary to diversify. If 90% or 95% of all the masks in the world are made by China, well, you may have a vulnerable situation. And there, do we go more globalized and have rules or what have you that say that countries with a company that operates in a foreign country must not be the product cannot be taken by the geographical location of the factory. Now, there are many ways of handling this whole thing. But nonetheless, reality on the ground is reality, and so the supply chain will move towards a deglobalized world, and to me, that is just the human progression of things, just like in the last 2,000 years.
Well, so you talk about progression of things, and this is not a question I was contemplating when we were talking before, but the other thing is China getting close to a point where it's losing its competitiveness in certain kind of manufacturing processes, simply because its living standards are rising, its wages are rising. Another historical phenomenon is certain kinds of manufacturing moving from one region to another, from one part of the world to another. Is now Bangladesh going to be taking up stuff that China was doing 10 years ago simply because it's a cheaper place to do it, or Vietnam, or maybe Vietnam more likely, etc. Where do you see China in terms of its evolution, in terms of what it does?
Well, first of all, Richard, if anybody is only waking up today and say that, oh, shucks, never thought of it, China is losing competitiveness in manufacturing. If somebody is thinking about it the first time right now, he's really even dumber than I am. Okay, I'm a dumb guy, but he or she is dumber than I. And the Chinese recognized that long time ago. Remember in Guangdong, about what, 10, 15 years ago, they had a new guy who is now in the central government, Wang Yang. When he came, he was sent down to Guangdong to head that province. He already moves a lot of the cheaper manufacturing out of the province, recognizing this phenomenon that you're describing, that China is going to lose competitiveness sooner or later. So you better go upgrade yourself, be sure that you're higher value added. So as a country, China has been aware of that for a long time. The only thing, however, is that China is done big. It's not just one country. Each of the provinces, and there's 20 some of them, each of the provinces is as big as most countries in most parts of the world. So that thing can move about, from one province to another, one region to another, potentially. But I think that what you said, your earlier question about the deglobalization of the supply chain is going to exacerbate that and make it a lot faster. But then, of course, that comes to the question is, how good is the Chinese technology? But you're not asking that, so I won't go into that.
So I just want to remind the audience that you are welcome to ask questions. If you have a question, please type them into the Q&A box. And in a bit, I will start passing those questions along to Ronnie. So do not hesitate to participate. I want to ask a question about a particular kind of real estate in China, it's the biggest kind of real estate everywhere, which is housing. In the last year, the Chinese people invested about $1.4 trillion US in housing. House values continue to rise rapidly. House price to income ratios in China are far higher than they are in the US, or in most parts of the world. A big difference between now and 15, 20 years ago in China, China's always been kind of crazy about housing, if you look at Chinese people, is they're using debt far more to finance the purchase of housing than they were. And so is this sustainable, and does this create potentially an issue for Chinese consumption down the road as people find that house values don't go up forever, mortgages have to be repaid, and so on?
Well, first of all, the problem, again, Richard, you described, is a long-standing one.
Yeah.
For the last 15, 20 years, I've been hearing exactly the same thing. It's like a broken record. They come back and again. But it is something to take it seriously, because it is true that if you have debt, sooner or later you have to pay it back. And so, sooner or later, after talking about it for 15 years, finally somebody will be right. That yes, oh, I forgot, debt has to be repaid. Well, what's new? And so the housing situation in China, a lot of people say that it's getting very, very expensive. But consider also the fact that savings rate is still very, very high, much, much higher than that in much of the rest of the world, certainly than in the United States. And then you have a one-child policy, you have four parents, whatever, two parents, four grandparents, all helping to pay. And then nowadays, a lot of these young people, before they get married, they don't need to pay anything. They live with the parents, unlike in the United States, or once you're 18, you get out of the house and move into somewhere else. And so the whole household finance, the structure of it is very different from that in the United States. And so it's not half as serious as people in the West think. You have to think about the environment in which the Chinese are living and the personal finance structure that they are living under in order to figure out whether that is something serious or not.
But that's it. I mean, a lot of economists look at housing as sort of a dead asset. Is you can't export stuff from housing. It's just, you know, it does produce something, which is the service cost of living space. You're basically paying yourself rent when you own a house. But is this a fundamental problem for Chinese growth going forward, that so much of its capital is going into this sector? And just contextually, relative to GDP in China, it's 2 to 3 times more than it is in the US that people are putting into housing, and its share of the capital stock, it's higher as for new investments than it is in the US.
Well, what you said is very interesting, Richard. You know, that in, say, the United States, people consider residential as a debt asset. That's because Americans, and the whole system actually is so debt-driven. And to the Chinese, a lot of people don't look at the residences as a debt asset. They look at it as an asset, because they have a much smaller mortgage, if a mortgage at all. And hence, to them,
excuse me, Ronnie, I didn't say debt asset, dead asset. Like
DAD.
DEAD.
Oh, I see.
It's an asset that doesn't produce other stuff.
I see.
Yeah, right? Yeah. You build a plant.
Yeah.
Or you build a port.
Yeah.
Or you build a road. You get productivity out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas a house, you get, you know, you live in it.
Not 100% true. Mostly true, because it appreciates in price or depreciate in price. And when you are appreciating in price, is producing some wealth effect at least. But the reason also, again, you have to look at the whole, well, this time not private wealth structure, but the public asset structure. There's just not a whole lot of things the Chinese can buy. Legally, you cannot buy gold. The stock market is really a worse than Las Vegas, oftentimes. And so where do you put your asset? So real estate become a very, very desirable place to put the money. And I happen to believe that in the long haul, not just in mainland China, but in many parts of the world, you know, consider the fact that now you have a zero interest or very close to zero interest. So what do? Hard asset will always win out in an environment like this in the short term. But in the longer term, with all the, you know, QE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, I come from Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a colony, sadly to say that, for a long, long time. So somebody like me is very sensitive to the word QE, because to us, there's only one QE in Hong Kong before, and that is QE2, the Queen Elizabeth II. And now the world has QE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And sooner or later, hey, as I misunderstood what you said, every debt has to be paid back. And so you don't have QE 10 or whatever and expect it to have no consequences. And so hyperinflation may come back one day. And I personally, I believe that it will. In which case, again, hard asset is a hedge against it. So I think that no matter how you look at it, real estate is, you know, you and I are in the same, in the right business, in the long haul.
So let's move on to, we said we talked some about U.S. China relations. And so how do you see them? So it's everybody knows that the relations are at a low, tensions are rising. Some people expect a Cold War, a few a hot one. What do you think future administrations from both countries will be more hawkish? How do you see us getting along in the years to come?
We're not getting along, Richard.
Yeah.
For a guy like me and like many other in the audience, I have devoted 31 years of my life to bettering U.S.-China relations. And that's how 30 years ago to this year, I joined Asia Society as a member. And so for those of us who have been working on bettering U.S.-China relations for a long time, it is really a sad thing to see what's going on today. To me, the saddest thing is the following. the Westerners have a saying which is amazing. The Chinese just are not smart enough in this regard to figure this one out. American has a thing called the first among equal, right? If you are equal, how can you be there be a first? It's oxymoron, but nonetheless, it's true. There is first among equal. There's three of us I can see it, on the screen, and Richard is the smartest. You have one vote, I have one vote, so hey, come on, we're equal, but everything is not equal. You're handsome, I'm not, so hey, too bad, right? So the Westerners have this concept of first among equal. So let me give you a new one. The Chinese say, okay, let's learn from America. That's the thing called first among equal. No question, the United States is by far in almost all counts, the first among equal. How about second among equal? I doubt there's, I don't know, 680 some people on the screen right now. Has anybody heard of second among equal? I suspect that 99% of the people have never heard of it. But the Chinese say, hey, okay, we learn from you. There's a thing called first among equal, and we recognize the United States as the first among equal. And the reality is China is the second among equal, and China was very willing and happy to play that role. And it has been so for the last 40 years. Well, China wasn't number two, but whenever it became number two, China was very happy to play second fiddle. And that's a sad thing that the United States, instead of working with China, decide to go against China. And so everything today is political talk. So if you don't see through the politics of it, then you will be whacked around today by this, tomorrow by that. Read the newspaper. I don't read newspapers because it affects my independent thinking. I don't watch news every day. I just have a summary of what's happening, the facts, and very little comment. That's all I need to know. And I think about it myself, hopefully. And so, the U.S.-China relationship today is all political talk. I mean, some of the most ridiculous things are being talked about, such as, TikTok or whoever, hey, they may steal information. They may steal data. Well, let me tell you something. America, I watch a video where American journalists in Washington, D.C. decided to take a 2-3 hour tour of Washington, D.C., went to the National Library, went to the hospital, went to here and there, and then he went back to his office, plugged in his machine, and everything that he has said, everything he has done, every step of the way that he has taken in the last 2-3 hours were all recorded there. You're walking forward now. And then later it says, you turn right, you enter a car, and the car started and turned left or whatever. So nowhere in the world today, and the more advanced country you are, the more your data is totally in the public domain, like it or not. And so I always operate on the premise that everything I say, everything I type into my cell phone, all my emails, anybody can see it. The only thing I don't want anybody to know is what I said to my wife, but if you really force me to say, hey, I want to see that, that's okay too.
There's a question here from Clay Doobie, who I think you know.
Hi, Clay.
He would like you to go further into the structure of household debt and family investment logic. On the Chinese economy, we heard, and this is from Clay, we've heard glass half full arguments focusing on the continuing consumption demand to power the economy. And we've heard half empty arguments pointing to the rapid rise in household and corporate debt posing a threat to that continued growth. So, he's sort of asking the question that I was trying to ask you, but doing it more clearly and better. There's a point where where taking on debt creates vulnerabilities that China did not have 20 years ago. And is China close to that point, or is it a long way from that point?
Let us put it this way. There's no question that some Chinese are taking on a lot more debt than, say, 5, 10, 15, 30 years ago. There's a lot of good things in America that China should learn from, or anybody should learn from. A lot of wonderful, great things in America. But there are a few things that you shouldn't learn. and one of them is over debt. And I think that China is still far away from that. And because of the savings rate and what have you, and the family structure, and many other things, the debt is still very, very manageable. Public debt is a different story, but I still think it's manageable. But private debt, which I assume is what we're talking about here, Richard, I think that it's still very, very manageable. And so, it's always alarmist, and it's always good to point out, yes, there's a ditch down the road, but if that ditch is 3 miles out in front, I'm not going to worry about it for the next half an hour.
So we have a lot of people asking questions about Hong Kong. And so the new security law, you see expatriates moving from Hong Kong to Taiwan, Hong Kong to Singapore. Will there be a practical impact on Hong Kong business as a result of losing U.S. most favored status? Will we see, and again, we talked about this earlier this evening, we saw a data center move today from Hong Kong to Singapore. Does Hong Kong lose its special place in Asia as a result of the events of the last 18 months or so?
We will lose something. There's no question about it. But I think a lot of people, before they move, they better think twice. And I'm not sure if everybody knows this part of the world. Take, for example, Singapore. I love Singapore. I bought a home there, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, so that every weekend, my wife and I, if we want to, we can go down there and stay in our lovely apartment. And the food is good, people are nice. So, hey, it's orderly, very good. But on the other hand, is Singapore a paradise? I don't want to say anything bad about Singapore, but hey, come on, let's face it. A friend of mine who's an American lawyer moved down there and 6 months moved back and he said, oh, I cannot live there. I have to be careful what I say. Well, Hong Kong, anywhere you have to be careful what you say. In America today, I mean, you say the wrong thing. Black lives matter, so you better be careful what you say. And everywhere else, for various reasons, we all should be careful what we say. And in Singapore, they have their issues over there. So is Hong Kong freer today in what you say than Singapore? I'll say Hong Kong is a lot freer still. But if people want to move down there, there's nothing we can do. The people who move to Taiwan is the dumbest. But anyway, that's another issue. I don't want to get into it. Once you get money into Taiwan, you cannot get it out. So you have any money, don't put it into Taiwan because you cannot get the money out. And so, a lot of people not being directed by more complete knowledge are making decisions that to me is dumb. But on the other hand, such as politics talks, and people want to move, let them move. I don't like to see Hong Kong suffer, but Hong Kong is suffering not because of COVID, but mainly because of the riot. That was really bad. How can you douse somebody, pour gasoline on somebody, and light a match and see him burn? I mean, that kind of stuff is just too much. And so, something got to be done. And what can be done? You tell me. If you don't like the national security law, tell me another way so that I, as an average citizen, can walk out of the street and be safe. And let me tell you, last year, the second half of last year, I was truly not safe. I got scared while I was on the street because bricks were being thrown around, bombs are being thrown around. How do you keep an economy going that way? So, the West, for political reason, they're not against Hong Kong, they're against Beijing. And so they say all these political things and say, hey, Hong Kong is falling apart. Well, who is causing Hong Kong to fall apart? It's those people who are rioting on the streets. And for political reasons, the West buy into that. And so, that affects Hong Kong. And so, hey, no city go up forever and ever. I never look at myself as a Hong Konger. I always see myself as an international citizen. I'm very comfortable when I'm in Los Angeles, New York, Paris, London, wherever, Shanghai. I feel at home. And so, that's the position I take. But I'm still sad to see that the Hong Kong, which is so beautiful next to my apartment here, is being affected negatively for our economy.
So I do want to spend a little time on retail real estate because it's what you guys do, and I think Adriel is going to weigh in here. You know, one of the things that COVID has done is.
Sorry, can I say one more thing, Richard? National security law. So a few of Americans have said to me, "Hey, you know, foreigners, if you break Hong Kong laws, you better not go to Hong Kong or mainland China." I say, okay, if I'm Iranian or Iraq, and I plan against the United States of America, I'm planning the next, I don't know, 911 or whatever. And then do I want to fly into Los Angeles? Do I want to fly into LAX? I suggest that you better not. I'm not, that person is not an American citizen. He's a foreign citizen. He hasn't done anything yet. But hey, CIA is pretty good. We know the information that this guy can be a danger to the United States. And so when that person, if he is dumb enough to fly into Los Angeles, will he be arrested? You better believe it. Will he have a public trial with a jury and all that stuff? I doubt. This is national security, my friend. And so, you know, too bad that we have to get to that point. If in 2003 or any time in the last 23 years, according to the Hong Kong Basic Law, the Article 23, which is the locally legislated national security law, was legislated, then there's no need for today's Beijing's initiated NSL, national security law. It is exactly those pan-democrats who force Hong Kong not to pass Article 23 that is bringing upon their own head the national security law enacted by Beijing today. And there's no country on earth that does not have a national security law that covers every part of its territory. And Hong Kong, for the last 23 years, did not have a national security law. So we were still using the old British one, actually, if anything. And so that situation has changed. And after 23 years, what do you think, if you were Beijing, what would you do?
Well, what I would say, Ronnie, though, is, and I would let this go, but I can say things in the U.S. that perhaps are socially unacceptable and perhaps make me a pariah among some people, but I don't get arrested for it.
Who says that you will get arrested if you have a conference at the Asian Society Southern California Center on how bad the Beijing government is, and you can say all the bad things about Beijing leaders? That's fine. You can come to Hong Kong. You're going to fly to Beijing. I don't think anything will happen to you. You're assuming that there will be something happen to you. That you'll be.
No, I'm not saying it's going to happen to me. I'm saying that clearly there are places in the world where it is easier to express unpopular views than it is others.
True.
And that the threat of violence against you for saying things that others might not like, particularly the government, is much lower than other places. And while there are, in my view, disturbing things happening in the U.S. right now, I still feel like I can say whatever I want within the U.S. about the U.S. and not be threatened with arrest or violence.
That's a problem for a Chinese citizen, not for you. The Chinese citizen has to know what is acceptable in the United States. Well, if you're a U.S. citizen, you have to know what's acceptable in the United States. If you're a Chinese citizen, you have to know what is acceptable in China. And in China, no doubt, it's different. The bar is different. And so the Chinese people, are they more unfree than the United States? In some ways, yes. Something you don't want to say. But on the other hand, I feel a lot safer walking down the street of Shanghai, Beijing, or wherever in mainland China than walk down in Los Angeles. And a friend of mine, he had a baby. He went down to buy milk for his baby one night in San Francisco area, and he never get home. It's just unsafe. So yes, what you say is important. It's one dimension. There are many other dimensions to life, isn't it? And in terms of personal safety, I feel a lot safer in Beijing than I feel in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles for that matter.
I feel perfectly safe in LA, but that's another discussion. We can have some other.
We'll pay for you, Richard.
Let's talk about shopping centers for a bit. And COVID is changing people's shopping habits, at least temporarily. And as it is, we know in China, e-commerce has been a much bigger share of total retail spending than the US before all of this. We've seen substantial increases in online sales here in the US. Our shopping centers were already vulnerable here in the US before COVID. I think in part for reasons that had very little to do with Amazon. I mean, Amazon matters a lot, but it's also things like the way households are in the US. People have less time to shop. Like China, we're an aging population, and one of the things my research has shown is as when people retire, they basically stop buying stuff. Even if they have pensions, so their income remains high, the share of their income that goes to retail spending goes down considerably. And income inequality is bad for retail because it sort of means that the middle class stores don't have customers. And so you have all of these things that have played out in the US retail sector that has really weakened it over the last 15 years or so. And I'm curious what the analog would be in China, how shopping centers are doing. Do you think that people doing more online shopping because of COVID is going to change habits for the longer term? So what do you see as the evolution of retail in China, in Hong Kong, and worldwide?
Ronnie, do you want to start, or would you like me to take this?
Please.
Thanks, Richard. I mean, we talked about this a little bit on the May 18th chat, and so I'll refer anyone who's interested in hearing that in more detail to the ASSC Facebook website or your website for that. But you know, what I said in that conversation was that this doesn't change anything, that COVID hasn't fundamentally changed retail. What it's done is accelerated it. Since our conversation, I've had conversations with some of my friends in the retail industry, as well as other investors, and actually, I think most people see it that way. So online retail is definitely here to stay. It's not going away anytime soon. It will only increase. And what we've seen as a result of that in China and across our malls, which are primarily high-end malls, is people spending more on high-end goods, luxury goods. The recovery for luxury has been a lot faster than for mass market goods, and that continues. And I think that there's some, and the typical topics that retailers talk about: experience, local, novelty, niches, unique experiences, and service orientation. These are all just becoming even more important faster. So for people in the retail industry, I think you know, your fingers on the pulse. And I'm sure you realize these things, but you have to do that a lot faster than we would have if there were not COVID.
What about the food and beverage sector? Is China, how are restaurants doing? I know that they've opened with social distancing. What does that do to capacity? Can you be profitable in a socially distant world with restaurants?
For the time being, the answer still looks like yes. Here in Hong Kong, restaurants are doing as well as they were doing pre-COVID. In fact, they were, in some cases, doing even better. But at the same time, obviously, the social distancing and hygiene is a concern for everyone. I'm not concerned that it will not come back. The question is how long it will take. So how long it'll be for COVID to blow over. A quick note on that, you know, I think what we've seen both in the US and in mainland China in F&B is a move towards, you know, concepts and, you know, much more interesting concepts. It's not just Panda Express and KFC anymore. You know, you have food trucks, and then you have locally grown, you have very niche sort of markets which are becoming more popular. And the same is happening in China as well, and here in Hong Kong.
Can I add something, Richard?
Please.
The United States has roughly about 24 square feet of retail space per person. In Asia, in general, is about 10. Yeah. Europe is even less, 3 to 5. And so when the United States is feeling the pain with many department store closing and many shops closing, just take that number into consideration. When you have, you know, 1.5 times per capita of retail space, it's perhaps overdone. That's point number one. Point number two, on the online shopping. The online shopping in the United States, only in the last, 5-10 years that the shop owners really get to feel it. But in China, for the last 15-20 years, we have to coexist with very big boys like Alibaba, JD, and so forth. And we have to coexist with those guys. And as I've always said, for any product, for any market, there will come a time when the online and offline will reach some form of equilibrium. And in mainland China, that equilibrium has been arrived at in many product classes, many places, much earlier than in the United States. And so, if you have to live with those big boys, Ali and JD, for the last 20 years, and you have reached an equilibrium, so you're in a much more comfortable position, unlike in the United States. Then finally, with the COVID, no question that COVID has driven a lot of the purchases, the retail purchases of the lower end stuff into the e-commerce space. In the high end, as Adriel said, which Hang Lung, our company, does, we are actually having a gangbuster growth. I mean, we're having a hell of a good time because the high end you don't buy from the online. You really want the experience and the feel and the touch.
So your point about coexistence, I think, is a really important one. And I think one of the retailers in the U.S. that's adapted best is Target, that's done a really good job of integrating both their bricks and mortar and their online presence. And they've been brilliant at inventory management and at last mile. And they're putting drive-throughs in all their stores, so you can order something online and then drive through at the physical Target and pick everything up. When you talk about coexistence, are you talking about that kind of thing? Is that kind of evolution happening in Chinese retail as well, where there's really an integration of the bricks and mortar and the e-tail experience?
Adriel?
I haven't seen that yet. In some way in mainland China, the retailers offline and online have grown up together, as Ronnie said. And so there is already this sort of coexistence. In the US, I think because the shock of online retail has been so big to offline retailers, they've had to innovate a lot faster. In that respect, I expect to see more coming in China. But what you just mentioned about Target, we've not quite seen. I will note that Costco just opened in Shanghai, and they're doing gangbusters. So the Chinese are still sort of, there's that group of people who are volume and discount driven, and that's still very popular.
Yeah, and Costco's doing very, very well here as well. And I say Costco is maybe the most democratic place in America, because you see people from all income classes, all races, all ethnicities, all sexual orientations, the whole thing in there. It's the only place where you can see a 40-year-old Toyota pickup and a Lamborghini next to each other in the parking lot. So yeah, they've really figured it out. There's a really good question here for, again, Ronnie, on coming back to your point about the trend of globalization. Do you see a continuing having a longer positive slope? But here's the interesting part of the question. How should a long-term investor be positioning themselves in light of the dynamics going on with globalization right now?
Well, I hate to say this, Richard. We are now moving into a new form of deglobalization that is perhaps different from what we saw in the old days. In the old days is once the deglobalization reverses, it becomes quite fragmented. But today, fortunately or unfortunately, because of technology, because of the way geopolitics and geoeconomic works, the world is being forced into having several camps. The United States and the English-speaking countries mainly, the Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, they are no doubt in one camp. And then China, maybe Southeast Asia, maybe some countries in the developing world, they will be forced into having another camp, because you like it or not, Americans don't welcome you. You cannot do business there like TikTok or wherever. And so you have no choice but to do your own thing. You cannot use Android, so you have to start Harmony and on and on and on and on. Then the interesting part is Europe, the Western Europe in particular. A lot of people assume that Europe will go with the United States in many things, politics and economics. I am not so sure, especially in politics. And I think that continental Europe will be a lot more independent than before. The fact that they may move a little bit away from America doesn't mean that necessarily they will move toward China. Europe, don't forget, is an economy that is even bigger than that of the United States when you take the whole of EU together. And so you would have a bifurcation of the world economically into several pieces. And so the deglobalized world of today is perhaps somewhat different from some of the deglobalization that we have seen in the past. Now, how will that work out? I don't know. I can surmise a lot of things. Go back to the supply chain you mentioned. Will there be a supply chain for each of those three major parts? I doubt. I think that in different areas, these three major parts will have to interact in a different way. So the world of tomorrow will be a far more complicated place than the past.
You know, that's a really interesting point, because actually, if you look at supply chains in Europe, they are much more self-contained than they are in the US or China. So, I mean, it is Europe. So it's Germany and Japan, Germany and France and Spain and Netherlands all depend on each other a lot. But they really are not importing a lot of, Mercedes-Benz is not importing a lot of parts from China, whereas US auto manufacturers are. So I think that's a really interesting point. I think this is a really interesting question that somebody in the audience noticed, Ronnie, that you and I are much older than Adriel, and so wants me to ask.
Maybe not me.
Oh, not you. Well, oh, that's an interesting trick. I mean, we know you're a clever guy, but from a generational standpoint, Adriel, your views on U.S.-China relations, Hong Kong, etc.
The asker of this question may not realize that I spend a lot of time with Ronnie, and so in many respects our ideas converge. No, I mean, so I was born in the U.S. and raised here in Hong Kong. I spent most of my professional career in mainland China. From a quality of life perspective, forget feeling safe. Actually, I think mainland China, where I lived in Shanghai, was by far the best. I hope that this globalization or this deglobalization trend will stop, because I also consider myself a global citizen. It's not looking good, though. Where we are right now, the political rhetoric on both sides, it really doesn't look good, and all I can do is hope that someone can arrest this fall before it gets too far.
So with that, we are pretty much at the end of our time. I have been asked at 6:55 to turn it over to Charlie Coker for the benediction for the evening. So Ronnie and Adriel, thank you very much for spending time with us. Charlie, take us out, please.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you to Ronnie and Adriel for an amazing and interesting conversation. Again, I'd like to thank our founding sponsor, OUE, as well as our sponsor for the evening, East West Bank, for their support for this programming. I'd like to also thank our community partners, American Chamber of Commerce Shanghai, the Asia Society Hong Kong, the Asian Business League of Southern California, the Berggruen Institute, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce Los Angeles, the Harvard Club of Southern California, the Hong Kong Association of Southern California, the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall, the UCLA Ziman for Real Estate, the USC Lusk Center for Real Estate, USC Marshall School IBER MBA program, as well as the USC U.S. China Institute for their support this evening. I also would like to make an appeal to the general public. If you like the programming that we're doing and would like to support us to keep these programs free, we very much appreciate you either joining Asia Society Southern California, which you can do at asiasociety.org/member-LA or asiasociety.org/donate-LA if you'd like to make a donation. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And we very much look forward to you joining us on the next program. Thank you and good night.